Black History Year as an important event all year round. My name is Stephen Branbury. I'm Senior Lecturer in Law in the Law School. I'm also the EDI lead. I also sit on the Black History Year Committee. I'm delivering this event on behalf of the Black History Year Steering Group, and it is a vibrant group too. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to welcome our guest, Stephen Akinsa, who's been in practice for a number of years as a criminal barrister. So he's been in practice for 28 years as a criminal barrister and is a member of Great James Street Chambers in London. As an experienced advocate, he appears in numerous complex criminal and serious cases, which include fraud and murder. He began his youth work 15 years ago when he took the role of a Sunday school teacher at Croydon Community Church. I remember Sunday school. I have good memories of that, but that's where his passion has come from. And his passion for empowering and not so confident and less focused in the group enabled him to build dialogue, trust, and mutual respect in that community. His passion has intensified through his involvement in his work as a defence barrister, representing young people. And if you don't know what a barrister is, that's someone that represents you in court. And they ages range from 12 to 21. And these young adults have been charged with murder and drug offences. He's also worked with Urban Synergy for over 10 years and is an ambassador and mentor. So the purpose of today's event is really a conversation, so a dialogue between Stephen and I. And what we hope to achieve during this dialogue is we hope to explore the challenges and experiences of being a Black male barrister in the UK. Also, the psychology of Black males caught up in the criminal justice system. So why are so many Black males caught up in the criminal justice system? And also the drivers for criminal activity and impact on them and their families. So this conversation is going to last for about 40 minutes. And we encourage you to send over questions and comments you have for Stephen. We will allow 25 minutes to answer these at the end at around 7:15. I hope that's all clear. Now, before we begin, some housekeeping rules. So just make sure your camera is off and you're on mute while I'm in conversation with Stephen. And the reminder that this event will be recorded, so you can always go back and listen to the event. It will be available on our university blog site for you to view after, and it will be made public for the public to view as well. So without further ado, let's turn to Stephen. Stephen, I mean, you blow my mind with how many things you've done over the years. I don't know how you get the time to do it, but it's amazing. I think one of the first questions for me is, as a Black man, a Black male, why law? Why have you chosen law first?
Well, thank you, first of all, Stephen, and to the university for having me as a guest today. I actually have to answer that. I've got to go all the way back to the early 70s. And I regularly tell groups of young people about my interest in criminal law, starting with interest in famous cases that appeared at the Old Bailey. I was just fascinated as a young boy, wondering about why people appeared at that courtroom, because I was even aware of that court even as a young boy. But really the interest came really from watching Crown Court, the program that was on in the 70s. And although I didn't see anybody who looked like me,
Stephen, apologies. Can I interrupt? Apparently, nobody can see us on the Spot Me platform at the moment. So do you mind just stopping for a second? And they are trying to resolve this. Apologies for kind of interrupting, but I thought...
No problem.
That's really strange. Bear with me. I'm just in touch with Paula on the other platform, so let me check what's happening. Okay, we are back on. So, so Stephen, do you mind starting from the beginning, basically, with introductions and everything? Apologies for that, but it looks like we are back on. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming tonight, and a warm welcome to you all. And also a warm welcome to Stephen Akinsa, our guest here tonight. So this event marks another important event in our university calendar, Black History Year, which we are proud of at the University of Westminster, where we celebrate Black history all year round. My name is Stephen Branbury. I'm Senior Lecturer in Law in Westminster Law School, and I'm also the EDI lead in the law school as well. I also sit on the Black History Year steering group, and also I'm a member of the BME committee. And I'm hosting this event on behalf of the Black History Year steering group at the University of Westminster. I'm very pleased to be here to invite our guest, Stephen Akinsa, who has been in practice as a criminal barrister for 28 years. He's a member of Great James Street Chambers in London, and as an experienced advocate, he has appeared in many complex criminal and serious criminal cases. And these cases range from fraud and murder. He had a passion for youth work, and that began over 15 years ago when he took on the role of a Sunday school teacher at Croydon Community Church. I remember going to Sunday school myself. I had good memories of that. His passion for not so confident and less focused in the group enabled him to build trust and dialogue and mutual respect. And we know that's very important with the youth of today, especially Black youth. And his passion has intensified through his involvement representing these individuals. The individuals he represents range from about 12 to 21, and they range from murder and drug offences. He's also worked closely with Urban Synergy for over 10 years as an ambassador and mentor. The purpose of tonight's event is really to have a conversation with Stephen, so open dialogue, and the conversation will explore the challenges and experiences of being a Black male barrister in the UK. If any of you don't know what a barrister does, a barrister is normally the one that is in court representing you. And the focus is also looking at the psychology of Black males caught up in the criminal justice system, because we know that's a problem, and also the drivers for criminal activities and the impact it has on them mentally and their families. This conversation will last for about 40 minutes, and during this time, we encourage our audience to send over questions and comments you have for Stephen. We will then allow at the end 25 minutes, around 20-25 minutes, to answer these questions. Again, a very warm welcome to you. It is a warm day as well, so I mean that literally. Just a few housekeeping rules. Just please all make sure that your cameras are switched off. Also make sure you're on mute whilst the presentations are underway. A reminder as well that this will be recorded and it will be posted on the university's blog site and also the Black History Year blog site as well. So it will be available for you to view after. So without further ado, let's turn to Stephen, the important man in this room today. Stephen, it amazes me all the things you do. I don't know how you have time to do all of them, but anyway, let me start with the first question. The first question for me is, why law? So why have you chosen law?
Well, first of all, thank you, Stephen. I'm glad to see that we both spell our name the same way, the posh way.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to join you and the University of Westminster in this open dialogue about law. I guess to answer your question, I have to go back to the 1970s as a young boy growing up in a home where education was very, very important. I knew that I would have to read my books. But in terms of law, I was very much fascinated by cases that were being heard at the Old Bailey. Not so much currently, but going back in history, I was just fascinated by what cases took place there and what happened to people. I was always an advocate as a young person for the underrepresented or the bullied or the picked on. And also watching Crown Court, which was a TV program in the 70s. I was fascinated by, obviously, the courtroom attire, the way people spoke, the jury, and just the whole courtroom scenario. Even though I didn't see Black lawyers playing the roles, I was just fascinated by the courtroom. And I think that's where my interest in the law came from, as well as having a cousin who was already a barrister, a well-established barrister, certainly in the early 80s when I actually started my studies. He was well-established in employment law. So I had people around me that I could point to, as well as what I saw on television and read in books.
Great, a great answer. Just something I wanted to pick up from there. You said you saw in this program The Crown, and that was definitely before my time. I don't want to tell anyone my age, but I wasn't born then. You said you had your interest was sparked, even though you didn't really see Black lawyers, so you didn't see yourself in that environment. Mm-hmm. So how did that make you feel, and how did you overcome that, and how did you actually get into practice doing this type of work? If you because one of the things about students, when I talk to them, they don't see themselves in these positions because they don't see it in say the commercial they don't see themselves there, so it's very hard for them to aspire to that. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because obviously I'm always telling people how important it is to see people who look like you in order to encourage young people to go into various professions. But I didn't see anybody who looked like me. But what I did do was actually through research, and that was physically going to the library and reading about people, find out that there were Black barristers who'd been in practice working in the UK since the late 19th century. And so I knew that people had trod this ground before. And so even though I didn't actually see anyone who looked like me, I knew that it was not an impossible dream. Despite some teachers telling me to forget it, that I was being unrealistic, I knew that I had seen people like me do this job. So that encouraged me. And then, of course, later on, I was encouraged by seeing my cousin in practice, and also someone in my secondary school going on to university and then on to become a barrister. And he was a close friend of mine. So I could see someone actually going into the profession.
Interesting, and a great response to it. And I think it's one of the things that in society we are trying to deal with, especially in the university as well, that the history is hidden. And this is the reason why we have Black History Year, not Black History Month, Black History Year.
Yeah.
And the main driver of that has been Deb's, amazing, but it shouldn't be contained to 1 month. So yeah, I could see, so you had to search further for looking for people that looked like you in the books, hidden away, not on telly or programs. Very interesting, and I think that's an important point to take away, that actually in some cases not seeing people in that position actually you're inspired more to do it, because people you can't do it, it gives you're more likely to overcome those obstacles because you want to prove them wrong. Thank you. So my next question sort of linked to that. So we talk about law. Now, there's an issue with the criminal bar where we have a lot of BAME practitioners in the criminal bar. So what, and I want to explore that a bit more. So why the criminal bar? Because this is where, so you talk to people in law and they say all Black barristers are criminal practitioners, and a lot of Asian people from Asian heritage are criminal practitioners, or they do family work. So why the criminal bar?
Good question. And, you know, to be honest now, looking back after all these years, I actually am comfortable in the fact that I'm in the place that I want to be. But when I started, it was very, very difficult for many of us to even think about wanting to perhaps obtain what we call a pupillage in a commercial set of chambers. It just was very, very rare. First of all, because of the bar that they would put in terms of what school you went to, which university you went to. I mean, that was far more prevalent then. So if you didn't have a 2-1 from Oxbridge or one of the top 3 or 4 universities, you were already out of the race. And so many of us, just in our desperation to qualify and be called barristers and to enter this illustrious profession, took up the position of being invited to join chambers that were common law sets of chambers that practiced in family, criminal, contract, and not, you know, the very highly lucrative paid work such as commercial, company, international. Well, our faces were just not seen there. And even today, there are very few, by comparison, Black and ethnic minorities, I would say, in those fields of practice, although the numbers are increasing. But certainly back in the 90s, it was just very difficult to get into those chambers. You would apply, but you would be very lucky to even get an interview.
Interesting. And that's the answer I was expecting, actually, because all you need to do is look on those chancery chambers that deal with, you know, chancery chambers. And you need to look at their barristers, and they don't look like us. And I think that is an issue that they are trying to address at the bar, but we've got a long way to go. So they have different recruitment policies now where they cover up surnames, because we know if your surname it doesn't fit with or from, you know, they can associate it with being African or West Indian, you're not even going to get selected. And now some chambers are now doing anonymous and looking at these recruitment practices. So yes, so what we can conclude is it is changing, but slowly. So not much has changed since then, but, you know, they are striving to do better.
Well, I should say also, Stephen, that even applying to criminal sets of chambers, and I could tell you one story, I won't name names, where I was invited for interview. I think I was the only Black candidate being offered an interview. And when I got into this room, there were 15 barristers in the room on a weekend. And the first question I was asked was where I was from. And I asked them, well, you know, what do you mean, where am I from? I can tell you I'm from Bristol. And the response was, no, where are you really from? And so even back then in a criminal set of chambers, one was facing those sort of stereotypes, and perhaps one could even call it racism now, looking back at it, people asking you where you were really from based on the fact that, you know, you had a foreign sounding name.
Yeah, and I you know, I've experienced that type of stuff in academia as well. So, you know, it's common. So it's still there. You know, when you say you're Black British, people look at you, Black British. What do you mean, Black British? Black, so you must be from Africa or the West Indies. Yes, my parents might be, but I label or I am Black British. That's the way I where I fit in these holes that they give us, all these labels. Yeah, interesting. Moving on to another question, and this really relates to challenges and experiences of being a Black male barrister. So you've spoken about some of these things. We want to explore them in a bit more detail. How have you navigated your role in criminal law? Now, what I mean by this, we have these stories of where barristers, Black barristers, go into court to represent clients, and they mistake them for the defendant. Or they don't say you're always someone else. Yeah. So you're not the barrister, basically. So you might be the person being prosecuted, or you might be, I don't know, the usher, but you're never mistaken for the barrister. And that's quite common, a common complaint from barristers. So how have you navigated your role, especially in the sort of court setting, and when you're viewed as a criminal, rather than defenders or protectors of the rule of the law? So how have you navigated that?
I'm just going to connect myself to some more power, Stephen. One moment.
That's absolutely fine.
Well, the funny thing is that when I read recently about certain young Black barristers being asked who they were and whether they were the defendant recently, it took me back to the early 90s. And I couldn't believe that those things were still happening, because there were occasions when I would turn up to a court in London, even though I was well dressed in a suit with my barrister's bag and my wig and gown, and the security staff would still ask me which court I was appearing in, looking on the list for the name of defendants. And I remember being very angry initially by this, because I thought, well, after all these years of hard work, and still the perception is that I must be a defendant and not the person representing. And often the same thing when you got within the court building, court staff would ask you, who you here, who are you representing, only when you were wearing your wig and gown. But if you turned up just outside the courtroom in your suit, just to inquire, what the list was like that morning or who the judge was sitting, they would ask you immediately whether you were the defendant. And that sort of treatment can be quite demoralizing. But as I say, I'm really saddened to hear that that's the experience still today of junior Black barristers going to court, because there are a lot more Black barristers than there were in the early 90s.
So how did you, so it was demoralizing. So what advice would you give to young barristers or people thinking about the law profession? So how did you navigate your way around it? Were you stern? Were you saying, no, I am the barrister here? And or how did you do it?
Absolutely, because one of the things you realize as a Black man, not just focusing just on my legal career, but in the classroom, at school, just generally in life, certainly I'm thinking about my own experience as a young Black man growing up in South London in the 80s and early 90s. The reality is that these things happen. Even if you go into a shop, sometimes you're standing there, you're next in line, and the person will say to somebody else, oh, how can I help you? And you're standing there and you're thinking, well, I've been stood here. I'm next in line. I'm next in line, but you won't serve me first. So once you sort of equate those general experiences to what's happening to you as a professional, you understand that, this is just something which is part of the fabric, which you can react in two ways. You can become really angry, or you can be professional and stern, as I was, and make it quite clear that I'm the barrister, I'm here to represent so-and-so, and this is my name. And if you get my name wrong, I'll tell you how to spell it.
Yeah, very interesting, because I can sort of relate to those experiences. Coming into academia quite young, and because I looked young, I made sure I wore a suit. I remember coming with my cravat, and you'd get these students walking past you, and you'll go into a class, and they say, are you the lecturer? And I said, yes, I am the lecturer. And it will stop there. And then and I've worked in institutions before where students are from Oxbridge and, don't look like me. And again, you have to, go in stern, because what they sometimes will do is test you for the first few weeks to see whether you know what you're talking about, because actually someone doing law you don't really fit their profile, they think. Yeah, and are you qualified enough to teach? And it's nice that you brought your experience outside of your profession, because I've experienced the same thing as well. You go to shops and you're followed around the shop, because you can't afford anything in that shop, because you're from a certain race. And I remember I used to avoid some of those shops, and sometimes I used to think it was funny, but actually now when I look back, this is racism. So yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to black males caught up in the criminal justice system. And what I mean by here, they're normally caught up, or they may be caught up in, say, drugs and criminal activity. What would you say, so we're thinking about psychology, so what would you say are the drivers for criminal activity, and what is the impact on them and their families? So what would you say?
I think, you have to go right back to schooling. And by that, I mean, if you're excluded from school, there's a very strong chance that you're going to end up either not going to any formal education or ending up in a pupil referral unit. Pupil referral units are sometimes, not always, but sometimes places where young people are exposed to pro-criminal activity already by those who were there. And then you have socio-economic issues, which means that some youngsters are driven to commit crime in order to survive, to pay the bills, if you like, because mum, if it's often a single parent family, predominantly the ones I've been involved in, is struggling financially. And sometimes the youngster says, well, you know what, I'm going to get involved in criminal activity just to support the household. Sometimes it's because they want to make quick money. Sometimes it's because they don't see themselves aspiring to be anything great anyway. And so the only option is for them to get involved in this pro-criminal activity, which leads to entering the criminal justice system. But what people never tell them is obviously the consequences of it, or what they never think of the consequences that impacts not just only them, but their family. And obviously once you embark on that road, it can become very, very complex, and sadly can either lead to significant terms spent in prison, or, as we've seen with many of our young people in many of the cases that we read about, them ending up dead. And so, it's very complex. There are a number of reasons why our young people end up in the criminal justice system. But I think one has to go back, certainly starting with education in the classroom.
That's interesting. I mean, I went to a school where a lot of my friends were excluded and end up in pupil referral units. And to be honest, most of them are not doing things with their lives even now. And it's quite sad to see. And, I agree to an extent that sometimes the pupil referral unit is a driver or they're encouraged in that type of environment to turn to criminal activity.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just about the question here about being in prison. So have you got any stories or any experiences of young black males? This is more, why do they reoffend? So they come out of prison, they go back, they come out and go back. So what is their experience, black males, of being in prison? Do you have any stories?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for some of the youngsters who end up going to prison, and I'm certainly thinking of the young offenders institutions. I used to go to Feltham a lot to go and see clients there. And for some of them, it was an escape from what was happening on the outside, because the threat of being involved with rival gangs or retribution they actually felt safer being in custody. But of course, that brings other issues once they're incarcerated, because some of the same gangs who they're trying to avoid also have connections and a network within the prison. And so you have that as an issue. You have some people who are repeat offenders because they find it hard to extract themselves from whatever it is they've got themselves involved in on the outside. So the minute they're released from perhaps what is a relatively short sentence, they're then introduced back into the very same environment that put them there. And so it's very difficult to extract yourself from it. And so you find yourself in this vicious cycle, going from prison to home, back to prison, for relatively short sentences, which then start to increase and get longer and longer. And as I say, also the prison environment is it's just not a good environment. Your mental health suffers. You're susceptible to physical and mental abuse, not just from your fellow inmates, but also from staff who sometimes work in the prison. So it's just not a nice environment. I remember my first trip to Feltham, and I came out, and I'll tell you, Stephen, I cried. I cried because I just saw numerous young Black men all sort of locked up like animals, if I'm blunt, you know, and that memory stayed with me. And then I remember coming out from the legal visit and seeing just families queuing up to get in to see their loved ones. And I looked at the queue and I just saw mothers, aunts, uncles, young people. And I was thinking to myself, wow, I mean, what an environment to come and see your one of your relatives. It's just sad.
Yeah, and I think you know, that environment itself, like you were saying about people or why you reoffend, this is why they go back, because they're treated like animals. They're treated like animals, and they believe they have to behave like animals. So when they come out in society, some of their behavior, you know, replicate that behavior in prison, and then they're put back in there. And it is, you know, very sad to see that, you know, Black young boys that got so much going for them that they have nothing to aspire to. And yeah, I mean, now I can see why you have so much passion for the work you do.
Well, I tell you, and the other thing, of course, is that one thing that always is clear to me from many of the young people I've represented, and I'll give you a quick example. The last murder case I did, the young man was found not guilty of murder. And I said, look, you've got your life back again, young man. Now I want you to go and live the life you were supposed to live, be the person you were supposed to be. And I remember downstairs in the cells at the Old Bailey, this young man hugged me, he embraced me. And he said, sir, you're the first man in my life who's actually endorsed me and said I'm capable of more. And often many of the young men that I represent, the first thing that strikes me is how bright they are. And you just think in different circumstances, different environment, with different encouragement, your life could be so much better and you could make the right choices that would sustain you for a lifetime, rather than making these impulse decisions, which are short-lived with very serious consequences. And that is where my passion comes from, to say, look, you don't have to live this way.
That's moving. I mean, yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's that mental or seeing someone like them or hearing it, just words. I'm hearing it saying you are capable, you can do this. Because they've always been told at school, no, you're never going to get there. You're too naughty. This is what Black young boys do, and for the elite. So like the legal profession has always been seen for the elite, especially the bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, just on that same sort of subject area or topic, so what kind of research or practice or social justice action do you think is needed to understand the experiences of these young Black males, and also mobilize them out of prison? So what do you think is needed?
I think what is needed is proper investment at all levels for our young people in the most deprived areas of the country. Because, we talk about youth groups, we talk about places for them to meet, youth centers. Unless we invest in those people who are qualified and skilled to deal with young people who have some of the most challenging needs, both domestically, personally, that's both, mental and socio-economic issues. Unless we invest in the people who actually understand how to reach these people, reach these youngsters and their families, we're never going to solve this problem. So my simple answer is invest in the people and the organizations who know what is happening on the ground at grassroots levels. You can get a whole load of suits and people around a table who purport to have all the answers, but who have no idea what it is to live in those environments, to live in those areas, to come up with, harebrained solutions that don't last very long. It sounds great, but it has very little impact. My view is to invest in the people on the ground who know what is happening. And that starts from the local communities, that starts with schools, extracurricular activities at schools, training courses for young people, proper training courses for those who perhaps don't want to go to university, those who perhaps show a flair in a different area. We live in a different time now where, university is not always the answer for many young people. They have skills in many other areas, but all they need is some direction and input to actually steer them on the right path. So once we start investing, and that's the key word for me, investing in people, because I think we're in a situation now in our country where we're not investing in people. We think things are just going to fix themselves, but they will get worse as the poverty gap gets worse between rich and poor. We're going to see an increase in crime because people ultimately have to survive. So my basic message is invest in people, whether that's the people who can help those young people who are most at risk, or investing in the organizations where those young people are. So for example, in the prisons, changing the structure, looking at how they can have a proper structure in prison that actually does rehabilitate and prepare a young person for when they leave prison, gives them hope, gives them options, not a revolving door back to prison.
And I mean, I think we've seen not much of that happen, but it brings me back to, DBS checks and you've committed a crime some years ago, and before it would show everything. Now what they have, these filtering rules, which may help some, but there's still some way to go with that type of filtering, because this is another reason why some will go back to prison, because they don't see themselves in those jobs, because they need to have a criminal record check, and potentially something may come up, and therefore they can't do that job. And yes, in some cases there may be a risk to the public, and it's justified, but in other cases, perhaps it's not. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. The next question I've got here, and it's to do with mental health. So we know mental health is a big thing with Black men and crime. So the question is, to what extent does mental health play a role in Black people's incarceration? So what we're talking about is when Black people are labelled and misdiagnosed with a mental health condition, or they're sectioned because they are Black and they're acting potentially like an animal. They have to be sectioned, and where sometimes they don't have to be sectioned, it may mean some other type of rehabilitation.
Yeah, I mean, there is a concern that some young Black men are incorrectly diagnosed and then sectioned and ending up on hospital wings under hospital orders. Certainly in my practice, I'm always keen to ensure that young people who potentially, from the untrained eye, seem to have some mental health issue are quickly, properly diagnosed, i.e. they are seen by a psychiatrist or a psychologist to identify what issues there may be. And I think courts, certainly from my experience now, these days, are far less likely to just send someone to a hospital wing without really findings of a psychiatrist, often more than one, to see whether or not this person has got a mental illness, which can only be dealt with by way of sectioning. Concern with young men ending up in psychiatric hospitals almost without much challenge by the courts. But I think because of the highlight of certain cases and things that have happened, that has changed. The other thing I would say is that we as a community have to understand the impact that cannabis has. And I have to mention it because a lot of the cases that I deal with were young men who were perfectly fit and well, but often, sometimes through just one hit, then have an episode where they are never the same again. And then they find themselves subject to medication and sometimes being placed in a mental health institution under a hospital order because they have now been diagnosed with a drug-induced psychosis caused by cannabis smoking. And so I need to mention that because a lot of people seem to just dismiss it, but certainly a lot of the cases I've dealt with, drug-induced psychosis is excessively, or sometimes just one hit of the kind of cannabis that's being sold on our streets, which is not the cannabis that perhaps we know from, Jamaica in the Blue Mountains, or what the Rastas would smoke. This is synthetically made with all sorts of things that people don't even know what's in it. And for a young developing brain, it can have very serious consequences. And I've seen it. I've been to hospital wards and seen young men walking around like zombies. And again, that's hard to watch.
Interesting. Yeah, and I know the smoking of weed, what we refer to, can have some good benefits. The one from Jamaica, and it can help heal.
Yeah.
These ones that we have that's on the street, and I've heard that they've got all different names for them now. I'm amazed.
Oh yeah, I mean, I could begin to tell you, but they've got all sorts of names, and I know from looking at a lot of the forensic reports, when they tell you the consistency, what's actually in the substance, is frightening. Because they're all synthetic chemicals, all sorts of things that they put in.
It's an interesting one, because I would say there was a resistance when it was COVID for a lot of people from the BAME community to get the jab because they didn't know what it is. But then some would go and smoke cannabis and not knowing what it contained, which is
very good point.
Very interesting. All right, time is running out, but I've got 2 more questions really. Gang culture, that's an interesting one, gang culture. So how can we explain the social phenomenon of gang culture and its role in criminalizing young Black men and Black women? So what role does gang culture play?
It's like in a family. You have a young person growing up in a certain area of London, perhaps is not as close to their family as they should be, or their parents or parent is working all the hours God sends and perhaps not being able to spend that time with that young person. And then they find a family, and within that family, there are individuals who want to abuse them, in the sense of coerce them to get involved in all sorts of criminality for their benefit, but entice them, offering them financial rewards. Also notoriety. For some people of low self-esteem, here's your chance to be viewed as someone to be feared, someone to be respected. And so again, it's very complex because you're talking about gang gang culture, which at the heart of it, I guess, has the desire to make money illegally, but it needs recruits in order to do it, because the people at the top don't, as most criminal offending, they don't want to be seen to be hands-on. So they recruit people who are vulnerable, people who they can use. And so this is in essence what you see with gang culture, which then leads to young people entering the criminal justice system. I'll give you an example. I have a particular client at the moment who, for some reason, has racked up a number of criminal offenses in a very short time. And looking at it, you just know that that person is trying to prove themselves. It might even be part of an initiation to enter the gang by just doing the craziest of things. But now they've got 6 or 7 court appearances pending, and it's all gang related.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. And like you say, the way they recruit them, they can sort of smell them. They know they're vulnerable. And that's the next best thing for them, because again, they have low self-esteem. No one's told them that they're good enough to do anything else apart from this. And potentially sometimes the family members may be involved and caught up in this type of activity.
Yeah, I mean, and of course there are young people who like that lifestyle.
Yeah.
You know, there are, I mean, we have to be honest, there are some people who are attracted to that lifestyle, but often, you know, through my representation, and I only defend people, are not ready for the consequences, because whenever something happens, they want to find a good defense lawyer to say, look, it wasn't me, I wasn't involved. So, you know, that's the reality of it. There are some people who just enjoy that lifestyle until the consequences hit them hard, or sadly they lose their lives.
And yeah, losing their life and the consequences hit them hard means it's normally too late, because they get a heavy sentence, prison sentence. They can't come out and do any job that, you know, needs disclosing, because those offences will never come off.
And what people fail to forget is that any single act like that you get involved in, whenever you're embarking on it, you're not thinking of the wider family. You're not thinking of that niece, that nephew, that aunt, that uncle, that grandparent. It's only after that you think the number of people who are affected by your actions, not just the victims, but your own family. So then you ask yourself, why?
Some questions from the audience, and hopefully there's some black male barrister. What advice would you give to any black students wanting to practice at the criminal bar, that it may seem impossible?
Well, the criminal bar is going through a really tough time now, as many people would know, because of, you know, legal aid and refurbishing the buildings. I mean, the system, criminal justice system, if you like, is in meltdown. We've got 50 to 60,000 cases backlog. Lawyers are working harder than they've ever worked. But what I would say to a young black lawyer who's interested in criminal law is that criminal law needs you. As we speak, there are less than 7 that I know, or even 5, black circuit judges in the whole of England and Wales. We need to be represented on the bench. We need to be represented in the profession. We need bright young people coming forward, because you're the future for tomorrow. People like me are coming towards the end of a career, you know, maybe another 10, 15 years. And so we need the youngsters ready to take the reins, who will then become the judges. Because why is it important? It's important because we will always have crime. It's part of humanity. But you want to ensure that people who come before the courts feel that they are properly and fairly treated, and that they have comfort in that when they do see people like them who are dispensing with justice. And that's a whole nother argument about the disparity between sentences of black and white offenders. But the point is that if you want to come into the profession, even though it's tough, even though it's challenging, I still encourage youngsters, come, because your face needs to be there And we only change a system, we only change an environment, not from the outside looking in, saying we wish it would change. We do that from being on the inside. And that's the same for any profession, whether it's the police service or teaching or the law. We have to become involved.
Thank you very much for that. And I agree totally that we just need to be represented. And it goes back to your point that you said, that you've got all these people sitting there coming up with these ideas, but they don't know what street life is like. They've never been involved in any street life. They haven't been on the street. They haven't been through the hardship. So we need these people that have been through the hardship and have, sitting in those places where decisions are made. I mean, people talking about the best thing for Black males, and there's not one Black person sitting in there. How would they, how would they be able to, relate to what Black males go through? And I'm not saying the whole room has to be filled with Black males, but there needs to be representation. And this is one of the reasons probably why we have these ideas, for, how to cut down crime, and then it's for a short while, then it goes right back up, and then there's no trust in the police. You see the police now, they're trying to recruit more Black people.
Yeah,
we're going to get to this situation where we have a lot of Black and representation is another story, but there's an emphasis on recruiting people from BAME and Black individuals. Interesting. So I've got some questions here, and I'm just going to read them out. I think the first question Sabrina's asked about the primary reason that leads to 12 to 21-year-old men down the path of the criminal justice system has been answered earlier, and that was a question earlier. And if Sabrina wants to send that again, if she doesn't think it's answered, she can. But I've got one question here. So it says, racial profiling is obviously a huge issue. How do we change this going forward?
I think, it's a good question. And I think certainly when we talk about racial profiling, I don't know if we're talking about that from the perspective of, let's say, the police. And I have a view that people just need to spend more time or be from the communities in which they police. In order to understand people, you have to be amongst them. So if you've never encountered people from, let's say, the Black community, you're going to believe a lot of the stereotypes that you've read or been told about Black people. And I perform an exercise, certainly when I go to schools, to teach about unconscious bias to the teachers based on my own experience. And I try to broaden their knowledge about the achievements of Black people in society beyond the usual sport and entertainment, to let them know that there are Black people doing things in finance. There are Black scientists who've done amazing things, the Black inventors. And I think we can only deal with racial profiling when people expand their mind to understand that a particular set or class of people or group of people are so much more than what you read about. And we need to change the narrative, the negative stereotypes that people don't celebrate good news. So they don't celebrate the young Black kids, the majority of young Black kids who are doing very, very well, who are in very, very good jobs, or going off to Oxford and Cambridge, or many different types of universities to pursue studies. Bad news sells, but we as a community have to ensure that we put out the good news, and those people who are in positions where they are interacting with the community need to broaden their horizons. That's my view.
Thank you, Stephen. That's interesting, because I remember always being told, and my brother as well, because he's a barrister, and he was always told, you're good at football, you need to be a footballer.
Yeah, that's what I was told.
Yeah, do football, that'd be good for you. And yeah, that's quite common. All right, I've got another question here from Anon. It says, I watched an interview from Akala a few years ago where he mentioned that he was in a bank and saw a young man depositing a large sum of money. He caught himself subconsciously thinking that the man was up to no good. Do these deeply internalized prejudiced thoughts sometimes emerge for you, especially in your field? So he saw someone depositing money, caught himself subconsciously thinking that the man was up to no good. This is a young Black man, but he probably drug money. And he's asking, do these deeply internalized prejudice thoughts sometimes emerge for you, especially in your field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, I think, you know, we're all perhaps guilty of it, in the sense that, you know, certainly in my many years working in criminal law, I'm more skeptical than most about things that I see and observe. But you always have to take a step back and say, look, I don't know anything about this person. Who am I to, you know, prejudice comes from to prejudge. And I regularly tell the story about the only time I was stopped, I was in a suit driving through Vauxhall in a nice car. The police stopped me. I was in the wrong because I was speeding. But their initial behavior was, black guy, nice car, in a suit, not, oh, he must have a really good job. He's maybe a fraudster. But if I was a black guy in a tracksuit driving around, they'd most probably say I was a drug dealer. So you can't win. So I learned, try not to prejudge people, because you just don't know who people are. And certainly in my profession, you know, I've encountered people who have that level of prejudice where they assume that you're not the lawyer. But after many years now, you know, you get to carry yourself in a certain way, and people soon realize very quickly that you're not the client.
Yeah, and it's very interesting as well. You say that because sometimes when I'm with some of my black friends, we actually have a laugh and say, we look at that black person and think, oh, he's up to no good, and what we do sometimes, even though we're having a laugh, what we're doing, it's still our, you know, our prejudice coming out there, and we have to take a step back and think, no, this is not a joke. We are really probably internalizing this and thinking, and this is not good. So I'm very conscious of when I see anyone now, whether it's black, white, whatever, my initial thought, I take a step back, because I always think, what are they thinking about me when I come in with my suit, or if I go into that shop in tracksuit bottoms and a cap?
Yeah.
You know, even students, if I come in tracksuit bottom, pair of trainers and a cap, you know, sir, you're in trouble. Like, yeah, I'm in trouble. It doesn't mean I'm up to no good. And yeah, interesting, Stephen. Thank you. Another question we have here from Anon: what role do universities have in improving racial profiling?
Well, I guess the answer I'd come up with is certainly universities could have better relationships with schools and the people who are teaching in schools to obviously understand that, look, you're the network and the feed into universities. So you'd be the least or last people we'd expect to have racial profiling, because certainly we draw our students from that pool, from schools. And also working with, I guess, when you talk about racial profiling, I mean, one could talk about in the workplace, one could talk about in the police service. I think it's just a better awareness. Universities making it clear that their undergraduates and their graduates come from a wide spectrum of our population, often many brown faces, black and brown faces. And so we just have to make sure that universities, I guess, are doing their bit to let future employers know, to let the police service know that, look, we have these people from these communities in our academic institutions. So don't racially profile anybody.
Yeah, but interesting. And there's a lot of work to do. And I think what you're getting at is universities probably need to do more outreach work going into this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Working with potential students that may want to go into further education and saying to black students, you can be there. You can. Here's an example. Here's me, for example. I'm a senior lecturer in a law school. It might not be easy.
Yeah.
Here's Stephen. It might not be easy, but you can get there and you can navigate.
Of course.
Around. Very interesting. I think this one's been cancelled, but I'm just going to say the question and sort of summarize it. It says, how do we stop the school to prison pipeline? And I think you spoke about that in a lot of detail about rehabilitation and the structure of the prison. So, and that was a question.
What I would add to that, Stephen, is as many of us as possible be involved in your local school. And by that I mean become a governor, become a governor in a local school and understand the school ethos. What decisions are made in terms of discipline in the school? What are the figures for people being excluded? Ask the questions, why are people excluded? What steps did you take before reaching exclusion? You can only ask these kind of questions if you're on the inside. So I encourage people from the community to become magistrates, become governors in schools, and then you get to be part of a system to understand how it works and how you can influence change.
Yeah, excellent. And again, it's those people making those decisions, being a school governor, and people like the people that are being excluded and expelled.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you very much. Another question. It says, how has all this to assert your identity? So what I think they're getting at here is, how has your experience had an effect on your mental health and well-being? So your own mental health and well-being, being a criminal barrister.
Oh, I see. Well, there are some cases that I've been involved in which are very traumatic. Because just as a human being, from the human being perspective, they can be draining. But I certainly tried to preserve my mental health by trying not to take my work home with me. But equally, I'm so driven to make sure that as many young people as I can physically interact with, in terms of talking to them, explaining to them about the criminal justice system, so that people don't make the wrong choices. That's what keeps me driven and focused and sane. But the most challenging cases, I guess now with the level of seniority that I've reached, I just am able to maybe take a step back from work for a bit, and then maybe re-engage when I'm ready, if I'm really feeling the strain.
Interesting, lovely. Another question here, and I think this is to do with just generally, the question says, is this about toxic masculinity combined with poor role models and absent fathers? So I'm thinking that stems from the criminal, why Black males commit criminal activity. And the question is this about toxic masculinity combined with poor role models and absent fathers?
Yeah, well, interestingly, if you get a chance, I did a talk at the University of Newcastle on toxic masculinity a few months ago. And certainly that is a feature that plays in it. I call it misguided misguided masculinity, which is toxic. But then you fuel that, or you combine that rather, with absent role models, or indeed absent fathers, and that is a catalyst for disaster. I'm a firm believer in it. I'm not saying that every young person or every young Black male doesn't have a father. That's not true. But even if they don't have a father present, often there is no male role model. And I'm firmly of the view that young men get to a certain stage in their life where they do need the guidance of a good male role model to understand their place in society and what masculinity actually is, not what you're told masculinity is at the end of a YouTube screen or Instagram or Snapchat, which often fuels a lot of this behavior because it's seen to be masculine behavior, and it's not.
It's actually wimpish behavior in my view, because in my experience, some of the people I friends and people I know, when it gets up to they're in court, they don't know what to say.
Yeah,
they're very small. So and they're hopeless and sometimes reduced to tears. And
Stephen, when I address audiences, I say there's a code on the street which they're all familiar with, and everyone wants to talk at the top of their voice. But there's a code in the courtroom, and when they're in the courtroom, you have to tell them to speak up.
Definitely, they don't know what to say. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
there may be what I say, a big man on the street, but in the courtroom, they're like a baby.
Yeah,
trying to some of the things. What do I wear to court? But they know what to wear on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we've got a few more questions which we'll probably email you after. But Stephen, it's been great talking to you, and I can talk to you for another 2 hours about this. And perhaps I am going to exchange your email address and get you in for some other stuff for the university and to contribute to our Black history if you're willing. But it's been very interesting and thought-provoking, and it brings us to the end of such a wonderful conversation with you. I'd just like to thank you on behalf of the Black History Year Steering Group for giving up your time. I'd like to thank the audience for sending some interesting questions, and you know, for you giving your experiences to us, because I've learned a lot, which I will, you know, practice myself. I've been saying I'm going to be a governor for 5 years, and I'm not a school governor yet.
Now's your time.
So that's something for me to take away. And you've left us with a lot to think about. Just to everyone, that this event's going to be up on our blog site, and the link is in, will be in the chat. And our next event is on the 20th of June at 6 p.m. with Patrick Vernon and Charlotte Tobia discussing the Windrush. So we're going to be looking at the Windrush then. And you can register your place via the blog site in the chat. But thank you all very much. And thank you again, Stephen.
Thank you.
Amazing. And hopefully we'll talk again. And everyone, thank you for attending.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.